Damn it, Rachel, I told you not to call me at work unless it's something important.
I froze for a moment as my husband's voice came angrily through the receiver. He's currently on an overnight business trip. As a salesman, he's always emphasized how crucial his work is, and has repeatedly told me not to disturb him. I wouldn't keep contacting him if it wasn't necessary. And to think that those were his first words after finally getting through. He just assumed it wasn't anything serious without even listening, and it made me so angry I felt like my head would explode.
It is important, actually, your mother.
Shut up, if my mom needed something, she'd contact me directly. If you're the one calling, it can't be that important.
I'm hanging up now, this is why women are so. My husband cut off my words loudly on purpose and hung up the phone, grumbling. I exhaled deeply without realizing I had been holding my breath. Yet my heart still wouldn't settle down. Clutching my smartphone, I took several deep breaths before I could finally relax. I stared at the email screen for a while, then gently closed my eyes.
I wonder if he's ever heard of the saying, dead men tell no tales.
The email from my brother-in-law was undoubtedly to inform me of my mother-in-law's passing. My name is Rachel. I am a 32-year-old freelance web designer. After working hard in my 20s at a company, I finally went independent and now work from home, living with my husband. His name is Kenny. He was someone I met through a client who appreciated my work. We got along well, and without any major issues, we started dating and eventually got married. Kenny was calm and kind when we were dating, but his attitude became increasingly colder after we got married. Even when I tried to have a conversation, he would just say, "I'm tired," and then continue to stare blankly at the TV, ignoring me, or on his grumpy days, he would say, "Must be nice for you, you can work from home, all relaxed." At the office, no matter how much I dislike it, I have to bow down to bosses and clients. "I'm really jealous of you. Since you have it so easy, why don't you make some more elaborate meals?" Indeed, working from home allows me to work quietly without interpersonal conflicts. But I only earn commission-based pay, which isn't stable. There's also anxiety and pressure, it's tough. The atmosphere between us as a couple was growing more strained by the day. I was filled with anxiety about our future. Even so, there was a time when we tried to have a child. I hoped that having a child would awaken a sense of fatherhood in him and calm him down a bit. And I wanted to have a child before I got much older. However, that dream never came true. I was able to get pregnant once. I was so happy at the time, but I miscarried before even reaching the 6-month mark. I can never forget the pain of that time. The guilt of not being able to bring our baby to term. The unbearable sadness of losing our precious child, even though it was still a fetus. At that time, I couldn't focus on work at all and spent my days crying and shutting myself away.
Your womb was probably so uncomfortable that dying seemed like a better option, he joked.
Far from showing any concern, he looked down on me as I lay in bed, adopting a belittling and blaming attitude. Man, we have to start all over again, what a pain. By the way, can you even get pregnant anymore? His words, lacking any delicacy, wounded me deeply, and my heart crumbled even more. My mother-in-law was the one who saved me when I was at my lowest. Ever since we got married, I had a good relationship with her, exchanging messages and having her over to our house. We shared tips about favorite recipes and cosmetics, and although it was a bit cautious, we built a friendship-like relationship. When she found out about my miscarriage, she mourned as if it were her own loss and comforted me. Once, when my husband callously remarked in her presence, "Rachel, you're just a defective piece, and can't even bear a child properly," she became furious, grabbed him by the collar, and said, "Kenny, what are you saying? Come here." She scolded him while making him kneel. "Blaming your wife for a miscarriage, I can't believe it, Rachel did nothing wrong. It's just the whims of fate, and you, with your twisted character and way of speaking, I did not raise you to be such a son." Seeing her defend me like that made me feel a strange sense of relief as my heart had been worn down by my husband's attitude. And I felt a deep gratitude and love for my mother-in-law who stood up for me. When my husband was not around, she shared that she too had experienced a miscarriage before conceiving him. She said,
"There was definitely a baby, but I couldn't bring it to birth."
I was so sad and frustrated, I blamed myself. Back then, medical science wasn't as advanced, and the causes were not clear. They really said it might be the mother's fault. I was harshly blamed by my own mother-in-law, so I really wanted to tell you it's not your fault. Her words, as she held my hand, were painful, and I felt a tightness in my chest.
I often thought, if my body can't bear children, maybe I should just die along with the lost baby.
My dear mother-in-law, no.
I blurted out, and she smiled kindly.
It's okay.
I'm alive now, and after that, I had Kenny and 2 more children. So, it's going to be okay. You'll likely be able to have the next baby too. But I know it's tough right now. You can vent to me. We can just chat to take your mind off of it. It's been a few years since my husband passed away, and I have all the time in the world, call me anytime. Her warm, loving words made my eyes well up with tears. Before I knew it, I was clinging to my mother-in-law, tears streaming down my face. After that incident, my relationship with my mother-in-law deepened even more. Bound by a strong tie that felt like, or perhaps even stronger than, real family. However, my husband's attitude remained the same, indifferent even as I recovered and resumed my normal work and household duties. He didn't verbally abuse me anymore, but our conversations were far from warm. The words he uttered at home were mostly commands, like throwing his jacket on the sofa upon arriving and saying, "I'm tired, isn't dinner ready?" or leaving dishes out after eating and remarking, "I have a business dinner with clients the day after tomorrow, prepare some gifts for me," treating me almost like a servant. Otherwise, he mostly ignored me, treating me as if I were air. I wondered if there was any meaning left in our cold marriage. But on the other hand, my relationship with my mother-in-law continued, including messages and meeting a few times a month for tea or shopping. Because of my good relationship with my mother-in-law, I was afraid to open up about a divorce, fearing it would sever our ties. Moreover, the amount of money my husband brought home was decreasing. Although he was supposed to be earning well in sales, he only contributed the bare minimum for living expenses.
You earn money too, this should be enough to live on, right? He would say, leaving no room for discussion, unilaterally deciding.
His attitude seemed to say that since he was bringing in money, I shouldn't complain. There were no sudden changes in his belongings or attire that would suggest extravagant spending. Nor were there signs of infidelity, like finding lipstick on his shirt or business cards from nightclubs. Just busy with work, dealing with difficult clients, he said, as his business trips and overnights away increased. I wondered if he really disliked being home so much, or why he wouldn't just suggest a divorce if he treated me like air. A few months into getting used to a more frugal lifestyle, I had been working hard at both my job and household duties. My work began to be recognized more than before, leading to an influx of new assignments. Rates from clients I had worked with before increased, and I got more projects through referrals. As busy as it got, my career was steadily on the rise. Naturally, my earnings increased. And I felt relieved knowing that even if my husband's contributions were minimal, I might be able to save some money if things continued this way. Then, one day, it happened.
What? Another business trip? You were just on one last week?
I was surprised when my husband mentioned he was going on another 2-night, 3-day trip. Having just returned from one a few days ago, it seemed excessively frequent. It was possible for a sales position, but I hadn't heard anything about him switching departments since we got married. Such a sudden and significant change in his routine felt unnatural.
That's what I told you.
There are these annoying clients who summon me to different regions. Unlike you, who just clicks away on the internet, I earn my keep on the move. With that, he tossed an empty suitcase in front of me, indicating that I should get his packing done. Why do I have to endure this? The thought crushed my heart, and I silently looked down at the suitcase. Without any regard for me, my husband freely finished his meal and bath and then went to sleep. Even as I approached the bed, he was snoring loudly, showing no sign of waking up. His smartphone was right in front of me. I could easily peek inside with a touch of his finger for the fingerprint authentication. But finding decisive evidence there would undoubtedly lead to divorce. Then, I'd have to explain it to my mother-in-law. If we divorced, I doubted our relationship could continue as before. But maybe my mother-in-law might just scold Kenny and continue our relationship not just as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but as friends. As I lifted his phone to move his finger toward it, the screen suddenly lit up. A notification from the messaging app displayed prominently, showing a clearly female name. Looking forward to our weekend getaway. Last week was shopping, this time let's relax and get cozy at the hot springs. Strangely, I felt no anger. Instead, I almost felt joy at having evidence to claim damages from my husband and this woman. Seizing the opportunity while he was deeply asleep from drinking, I unlocked my husband's smartphone and launched the messaging app. I quickly took photos of the screen with my own phone and scrolled slowly, capturing all the messages from when their relationship likely started on video. There were photos taken on the bed, naked, and I had to steady my trembling hands. I also verified whether his overnights were truly for business or to meet this woman. It turned out that not all his trips were lies, sometimes he was genuinely on business trips. Throughout this, my husband showed no sign of waking up, making gathering evidence eerily easy. It was as if he had no intention of hiding his affair, and it made my head spin. The next morning, he seemed to notice nothing unusual. As usual, he sat down to wait for breakfast, complained about the seasoning, and belittled my job while complaining about how hard his life was. Even as I watched him leave through the front door, my heart remained strangely calm. I wondered if I should start looking for a lawyer, even finding the mental space to consider this. Perhaps because I had stopped talking, my husband seemed in a slightly better mood. Come the weekend, he unusually said, "I'll be back," before leaving for his trip, or rather, his affair getaway. As I tidied up the house and considered going out for dinner shopping, that was when I received a call on my smartphone from an unexpected person. My husband has one younger brother and one younger sister. The caller was my husband's brother. My brother-in-law is married too, and I heard they are living with his parents to save money for their own home.
Hello, I answered the phone.
And I heard a voice more somber than when we last met.
Rachel, I'm sorry to call out of the blue. The thing is, our mother, she suddenly passed away.
What? No, it can't be.
I let out a scream-like cry. Images of my mother-in-law, with whom I had shared so much, flashed through my mind. Her smile when we had tea together. The serious face she made when giving me advice. And the warm expression she had when she supported me through my miscarriage. The sudden news of her passing struck me like a stab to the heart.
It's true. She collapsed suddenly this morning, and we called an ambulance right away. But
Is your Kenny around? I can't seem to reach him. Asked this, I hesitated for a moment. The urge to tell my brother-in-law everything overwhelmed me, but now was not the time. It wasn't the right moment to discuss such things, so I resisted.
I'm sorry, he's not here right now. He's on a business trip. I know it's hard for you too. Should I talk to him for you?
thank you. That would help. I'm overwhelmed with things to do, and can't manage to call him myself.
After expressing my condolences again to my brother-in-law and offering to help if needed, I ended the call. Then I immediately tried to contact my husband. As I agonized over the pain of losing a mother-in-law I was close to, I grew frustrated with my husband for not answering his phone. After ringing more than 10 times, he finally answered, sounding clearly annoyed.
Hello.
I'm glad you answered. Actually, your mom has.
Before I could continue, my husband cut me off with,
What, Mom, what? Didn't I tell you I'm on a business trip? Don't call me over trivial stuff.
I was momentarily breathless. My husband was clearly irritated by the call during his affair getaway. Realizing that made my head hot with anger.
Come home right now. Your mother this morning, she was.
Shut up. I insisted strongly, perhaps too much, because he interrupted me, shouting back.
If it was really important, my mom would have contacted me directly.
If she hasn't, it means it's not a big deal. I'm working. Stop calling me, you hermit. He ranted on in a harsh tone and unilaterally hung up the phone. My hands trembled as I held my smartphone, stunned and confused. He wouldn't even listen. It was about his own mother. After repeated attempts, the call wouldn't connect, and soon I was told the phone was either powered off or out of signal range. It was hopeless. I took a deep breath. If he really doesn't want to talk to me, if he says not to call, then I won't. He said it himself, so he has no right to complain later. I left a note on the dining room table that read, "I'm going to your parents' house," quickly packed my things, and left the house. By the time I arrived at my in-laws, it was already evening. In the midst of the flurry, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law greeted me. On the living room table, a list of tasks for the family was laid out, with many documents scattered about.
I'm sorry, there's still so much to do, and so many people to contact. We haven't had time to tidy up.
No, I'm sorry for coming alone at such a time.
It's okay, but what about Kenny?
Will he be coming later?
Apparently expecting that we would come together, my brother-in-law furrowed his brows in confusion at seeing me alone. My sister-in-law also looked outside doubtfully, checking if my husband's car was there, and I felt guilty. I gathered my courage and shared the conversation I had with my husband a few hours earlier. After a painfully long silence, it was my sister-in-law who spoke first.
I can't believe this.
It was the sister-in-law who first broke the silence. Trying to control her anger, she clenched her fists tightly, shaking them, her face turning bright red.
That idiot. Damn, can I even get through to him right now?
My brother-in-law muttered under his breath with a dreadfully low voice. Looking closer at the note he was fiddling with, it listed the funeral home's name and the number of people to call. Next to the word chief mourner was eldest son, and my husband's name was written there. Noticing my gaze, my brother-in-law quickly let go of the note.
I'm sorry. I was told by the funeral home that normally the eldest son handles it, and I had already told them he would.
I'll try contacting the funeral home now.
Yes, we need to update them as soon as we know for sure.
My brother-in-law immediately called the funeral home to change the chief mourner to himself. I stayed over that night. The next morning, he rushed out busy with submitting the death notice and applying for the cremation permit. I recontacted relatives who couldn't be reached the day before to inform them of my mother-in-law's passing, and devoted myself to preparing for the wake. Despite the short notice, many people came to visit my mother-in-law at the wake. Whenever asked about my husband's absence, I explained he was on a crucial business trip that he couldn't miss. Responses varied, some people were astonished, others angry, and some even tried to call him on the spot. However, either his phone was still turned off or he wasn't responding to any calls. After a tumultuous night, I fell asleep exhausted. The next day, the funeral began, and somehow, I managed to bid farewell to my mother-in-law. However, during the final goodbye, I couldn't hold back my tears at her peaceful expression. I cried uncontrollably, and my sister-in-law and I hugged each other, mourning the loss of our mother-in-law.
You don't often find a mother-in-law so beloved by her daughter-in-law.
I'm sure Mom was happy to have gotten along so well with you, Rachel, my brother-in-law consoled me. The three of us returned to the in-laws' house and spent time reminiscing about my mother-in-law, shedding tears together. There was still no word from my husband. The following days were busy with funeral expenses and entertaining friends of my mother-in-law who visited the house. Suddenly, 3 days later, the front door of the in-laws' house was slammed open violently. Loud footsteps stormed in, and it was my husband who barged into the living room. "How long are you going to squat at someone else's house, you freeloader? You left everything at home unattended, what have you been up to?"
He started yelling the moment he saw me, then raised his eyebrows noticing his brother and sister.
He momentarily calmed down, looking around, puzzled by the tidy and cushion-filled living room.
"What's this, guests, and where's Mom? I'm thirsty."
Quietly standing up, my sister-in-law reacted. But quicker than her, my brother-in-law dashed towards my husband and slammed his right fist into his face. My husband screamed and fell backwards with a loud thud. Straddling him, my brother-in-law grabbed his shirt front.
Mom is dead. The wake and the funeral are both over. And you dare show your face now?
The usually quiet and polite image of my brother-in-law flipped in an instant. His face red with anger and spitting as he yelled, my husband looked dumbfounded, perhaps even forgetting the pain in his cheek. Eventually, as the meaning of the words sunk in, my husband shouted back, red with rage.
"I didn't hear anything about this. Why didn't anyone tell me about something so important?"
We did call. I did. Our sister did. Even Rachel did. Even our other relatives called you a bunch of times.
My brother-in-law's words made my husband choke up and look away. I don't know when my husband turned his phone back on. But combined, we must have made over 50 calls about my mother-in-law's passing. Pretending he didn't see or know about them was evidently difficult. Yet still unwilling to admit his fault, he glared at me.
It's your fault for not stating your business quickly. If you had just told me it was about Mom clearly.
I would have apologized to my clients and rushed back.
You were the one who refused to listen, weren't you?
My sister-in-law's icy voice cut through my husband's angry shouts. Contrary to my still shaking brother-in-law, she glared at my husband without attempting to hide her contempt.
Do you guys really think I would lie? My husband barked.
That's not possible, because I recorded that call. Would you like to listen to it?
I showed him my phone, and his eyes widened in surprise. Actually, I set my phone to automatically record all calls. Calls on the phone, unlike meetings on a computer, often involve minor corrections and additions and are easily misunderstood, leading to disputes over who said what. It's a useful feature for a salesperson like me, helping to keep track of who I talk to and about what. Of course, this included recordings of calls with my husband, which my brother-in-law and sister-in-law had already listened to. My sister-in-law glared at him as his eyes widened.
And brother, you're lying.
I checked at the company, there's no business trip scheduled for you. It seems like you've been taking continuous leave.
What, you checked up on me at the company?
Yes. She, working in the same company, had her suspicions and had investigated his department.
Well, if you're so busy that you can't even make it to your own mother's funeral.
It's concerning, isn't it? Or what? You have something to hide that would bother you if we checked. After staying silent until now, my brother-in-law raised his pale face and looked at my husband with a grave expression.
Hey, you've been on leave. So what have you been doing all this time?
My husband brazenly asserted in a loud voice.
What do you mean what? Work, it's obviously work.
Sometimes there are events I have to attend even if I'm on leave, you wouldn't understand. While he was yelling, I powered up my smartphone. It contained previously gathered evidence of his affair.
It was a trip with your mistress, wasn't it?
I said, showing my phone to my brother-in-law and sister-in-law.
Hey, what are you talking about? Don't make such baseless accusations.
Ignoring my flustered husband, I showed them the images of text exchanges between him and his girlfriend. And a receipt from a brand shop for a gift he likely bought for her. Among them was also a photo of the two of them with their arms around each other. Anyone would understand the situation seeing this? I was also able to show images of messages they exchanged right before this trip.
What is this?
I can't believe it, you neglected your own mother for a trip with this woman. And these messages, they're so sickeningly sweet, it's disgusting. My sister-in-law immediately showed her disgust. Contrasting with my brother-in-law who couldn't fully grasp the situation. Looking pale and turning to face my husband with a serious expression, he said.
It's not just about the trip. This is a betrayal to Rachel.
And spending so much on gifts for her, the damage to our household finances is too great. Considering my brother-in-law is currently focused on saving, the financial aspect was particularly significant. My husband had been contributing almost nothing to our home, funneling money to his mistress, which was unforgivable to him.
Wait a minute, what are you looking at?
My husband, infuriated, tried to snatch the smartphone from us. After seeing its contents, he exploded. When did you get this? You snooped on my conversations with her, huh, and looked ready to lunge at me. My brother-in-law managed to restrain my husband's hands as he grabbed my clothes roughly. Frustrated, my husband then violently threw my smartphone to the floor, making a loud crash.
I didn't want to do this, but how could I not suspect something?
You're barely home, always on so-called business trips, and you hardly bring any money home. All you ever have for me are thoughtless words, I just knew something was up. I stood my ground, picking up my smartphone, and continued. Then I just happened to see messages from your mistress. Other evidence just came out easily from the bedroom, you're so bad at hiding it, it's appalling that I'm the one being cheated on. At that point, my husband lost it.
Enough with the nagging, in a man's world.
When you perform at work and earn well, women flock to you. That's how it's valued, or do you prefer a husband who's a nobody, who can't draw a crowd or get ahead, huh? I couldn't help but bow my head as I listened to him. Not because I was hurt, but because I was laughing at his pathetic attempt to justify himself. I managed to compose myself, took a deep breath, and then shouted a retort at my husband.
You can only say such things when you actually start caring about your family. You have no right to speak of responsibility.
Never come back to our house again. Soon after, my husband was disowned by both my brother-in-law and sister-in-law. His mistreatment of his spouse, running to an affair without remorse, and his callous attitude towards our mother's death were reasons enough for them to sever ties with him as family. I cleared out all of his belongings from our home and started enjoying my peaceful single life. Of course, I took steps to legally address the affair, consulting a lawyer about seeking damages from both my husband and his mistress. Interestingly, the mistress turned out to be a woman from his company's client company. Quickly identified after my sister-in-law checked with company insiders after seeing the evidence photos I had collected.
It's just disgusting how low some people can stoop. She's as bad as he is. I need to rethink who I associate with.
My sister-in-law said, sharing the woman's information she found on social media. After filing for compensation and sending formal notices to both my husband and his mistress. It wasn't long before my phone started blowing up with relentless calls from my husband. Come on, cut me some slack, they kicked me out of the family home. And I had no choice but to rent a cheap apartment. But how can I live like this, he complained. And the alimony. That amount is ridiculous, you snooped around my stuff, didn't you? It's like I'm the only one being blamed, hearing his complaints without any understanding of his misdeeds. I was astonished and promptly blocked his number. A few days later, he started showing up at my house directly. Opening the door, I was faced with my ex-husband, who looked significantly more disheveled than before.
What are you doing here? I told you never to come back.
I pushed back as he smirked unpleasantly. Fine, I won't come in, but at least sort out the money thing. The alimony is too high, and I'm barely scraping by. I can't even afford a new suit. It's a big problem for a top salesman like me, right? That should be good enough, right? Shamelessly, he was begging for money.
Why don't you ask the woman you traveled with to support you?
I retorted sarcastically. At this, my ex-husband clenched his jaw and frowned in frustration.
It's all because you sent that alimony claim to her too. Why did you have to let my wife find out?
She's furious that she has to pay too, and it led to us breaking up. It turned out that the boyfriend who used to be a cash cow had turned into a financial drain, and my ex-husband was dumped. He had been squandering money on luxurious gifts and frequent lavish trips with her. And she, for her part, had seen my ex only as a source of money, a despicable woman. I see. But you're a distinguished person who thrives in the corporate world, unlike me. You earn well and are respected, right? Then take care of yourself. Goodbye. I said dismissively and slammed the door shut. I immediately contacted my lawyer and soon after, a restraining order was issued against my ex-husband. He had indeed squandered the money he earned on his mistress and frivolities and had dumped all domestic responsibilities on me, leading to his current squalid living conditions and inability to manage household tasks. When he showed up at my house looking unkempt, it was a clear display of his lack of life skills. Such a state meant he was obviously unfit for his sales job. Besides his appearance, he was also unable to cook, resorting to eating junk food daily, which eventually led to his poor health and inability to work. A few months later, I heard from my sister-in-law, who works at the same company, that he was fired. Finding a good new job was out of the question for him, and he failed to secure any full-time employment. However, he still needed to sort out his life and pay the alimony. A few months later, my sister-in-law told me she saw him working a traffic control part-time job on a road he used to commute on, looking pale and unwell. After repeatedly demeaning others and acting selfishly, it seemed he ended up stuck in a low-wage job with no freedom. Meanwhile, his mistress was unable to pay the alimony by herself and ended up having her parents cover it. Her parents were furious about her lavish lifestyle with a married man and required her to pay them back. All the luxurious shopping and trips they enjoyed were now forbidden. And she was under strict parental supervision, forced into a job she didn't want. She leads a suffocating life, working under constant stress with no personal freedom. Following this, I combined my savings with the alimony and moved to a new apartment quickly. The condo I lived in before held too many bad memories of my life with my husband. I wanted to leave that place as soon as possible. My work continues to thrive, with an increasing number of projects. And I've been able to build a solid reputation with multiple clients. Immersed in my fulfilling solo life and work, I embraced a fresh start. Several months later, I began dating a man I met at my favorite cafe in the new city. He works in product development at a major corporation and has a deep respect and interest in my work as a web designer. I was drawn to his calm demeanor and logical, level-headed nature. I was confident that he would never engage in obvious infidelity or brazenly betray his family like my ex had. Years later, we got married and were blessed with a child on the way. Throughout the pregnancy, which has been free from any complications, our baby has been growing healthily. My new husband has been incredibly supportive during my pregnancy, a significant factor in our current happiness. Now, as we both eagerly anticipate the arrival of our child, we are busy with work and preparing for the birth. Together with my kind husband and our soon-to-be-born child, a loving and tranquil home life awaits me.